I'll begin with introducing ma'am. Dr. Deepa Sinha is Assistant Professor at School of Legal Studies, Ambedkar University, Delhi. Before joining AAD, she has worked with the Office of Commissioner to the Supreme Court, Center for Equity Studies, and Public Health Research Network, and she is actively involved with the Right to Food campaign. Ma'am has done MA in Economics from JNU, MSc in Development Studies from SOAS London, and PhD from JNU New Delhi. She works on the issues related to food rights, nutrition, and public health. Ma'am has been the chairperson and governing board for Center for Equity Studies until March 2020. She is also member of governing board of State Health Resource Center in Chhattisgarh. Today, ma'am would be speaking on women's employment opportunities in the public sector in India. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you. Should I begin? Yeah, so thank you to all of you for inviting me for this. It's also a pleasant break in many ways to not be talking about COVID and the distress caused by COVID, which I'm sure all of you here are grappling and have dealt with in one way or the other in the last month. So this was a good break to get out of that and think about other things one was working on. So what I'll do in the next half an hour, 40 minutes is to basically, and I know that in the last few lectures you've heard, and again, even mine is going to be only focused on India. I don't have any expertise on the other countries in South Asia. But in the context of India on female employment, given the previous lectures in this series, I expect that there is already a certain kind of a background that everybody has. So I'll more or less straight dive into this issue of public employment and why one thinks that this could have that public employment could be an important area to look at when we are discussing the issue of women's work and women's employment. So I will not be presenting the context, but everything I'm saying is in this broader context, which I'm sure was discussed over the last few lectures, of declining female labor force participation, of very low levels of female labor force participation in India, and the challenge that poses for both policy and for women's lives themselves. So public employment is important for many reasons. When we look at it from the point of view of female employment, and once again, what I'm talking about here is more employment than the broader concept of work. All women work in one way or the other, especially in developing countries like India. But when we look at employment, that's where the female employment is low. And the evidence from across the world shows that there is a correlation between female employment in the public sector and overall female participation in the labor force itself. So countries which have higher levels of female participation in the labor force are also countries which have a higher proportion of women working in the public sector. It seems a bit obvious, but there is some literature to look at how when the public sector or government creates opportunities for women, that allows women to come out and participate in the labor market much more. A lot of this research also shows that public employment has the potential to narrow the gender wage gap. Once again, a little obvious if you think of it, because most of at least the regular jobs, and again, this is something that is changing in the kind of jobs that are being created even within the government in India in more recent periods. But generally, government creates regular jobs, you have regular salary scales, which follow the laws of the nation and therefore do not discriminate on the basis of gender. So for at least for the same job and the same qualification, you see that there is the same wage. Looking at it from the other side, in terms of job creation, you see that when there is investment in social sector services, that also creates a lot of jobs that mostly go to women. Again, it's something that India requires. Keeping aside the problem of low female labor force participation, there is also the issue of our social services, especially education, health, and so on, not being up to the mark, requiring many more people to work in them. and much more investment. And this is something that one doesn't need to labor this point very much again in the current context of the second wave of the pandemic in India, where the gaps in the health sector have been exposed like never before. And that kind of investment also, it has been seen, it creates more jobs that largely go to women. Like we'll see as we go ahead, even the current women working are largely in these sectors of health and education and so on. So although there is some extent of gender stereotyping here, it's also the case that these do create jobs for women. There is also the advantage of creating public employment of this nature, particularly the front line closer to the community in large numbers, which is that it also has a multiplier effect of this public spending. So if you have more ashas, more Anganwadi workers, more nurses, more teachers, more panchayat secretaries, all of these people usually belong to the class of households where salaries or wages go into their hands, that is largely spent on consumption, which contributes to multiplier effects. Again, something in the current context in India, even pre-COVID and even more post-COVID, is something that is greatly required given the demand deficit that we have faced, particularly in rural areas. Human development outcomes linked to this issue of investment in social sector services. Once again, to have better human development outcomes, to have better infant mortality statistics, to better health outcomes, better education outcomes, we need more people. These are all sectors which are human resource intensive, where people cannot be replaced by technology beyond a point. And India, as we know, has been not doing very well in terms of its human development outcomes, even in those years where the growth rate was fairly high. And this is again seen as one area where increasing public employment, having more people providing these services, could improve human development outcomes. On the supply side of women's employment, it's also seen that women seem to have a preference for government jobs for various reasons, which we will discuss as we go ahead a little bit from a recent study that we did in Telangana and Bihar. I will share women's voices, and this is again not something entirely new. It has been documented even earlier, but it's generally seen, especially in this context of cultural arguments for why India has low female workforce participation, that women are not allowed to work outside the house and so on. This becomes important because when you look at it from this point of view on what is the kind of employment that women are willing to do or want to do, you see a more nuanced picture where they do want to work, but it is the kind of employment which they are able to do in the current circumstances, which go hand in hand, where they can manage their domestic chores and their unpaid work burdens basically. So like we know, women are along this continuum of paid and unpaid work, and that plays a huge influence in women demanding government jobs because of the fact that it comes with fixed timings, usually close to the home and so on, which I'll discuss a little bit. So while these are all the arguments in the literature and in theory for why public employment is important, even when you look at the data, we see that the government is a significant employer of women. Of course, starting with the fact that there are very few women in the labor force. But of the women who are in the labor force, the biggest chunk continues to be in agriculture, although that is reducing. We've also seen the absolute number of women employed by agriculture coming down in the most recent period. But keeping agriculture aside, if you look at employment outside of agriculture, then you see that government is a very significant employer. So if you look at 2017-18 figures, so this is all NSS data, 2011-12 is from employment unemployment surveys, and 17-18 is the PLFS data, and Varsha has worked with us on this. If you look at the 2017-18 data, we basically find that in rural areas, in rural areas of women in non-agriculture, 23%, so almost a quarter of them, if you look at only the principal status, are in the public sector. And when I say public sector here, I mean in government ministries, departments, and also public sector enterprises. But public sector enterprises is a very small component. We've included that because in 2011-12, it's not separated. So for comparison, you have to include the public sector enterprises. But like I said, that's very small. So about 23% of women outside agriculture in rural areas are in public employment, 20%, 1 in 5 if you take rural and urban together. If we include the subsidiary status, that goes up 27% for women and about 23% for rural urban together. And you can see that public employment is not such a major contributor to employment when it comes to men. So this adds to that thing of how it is a sector which is more highly women concentrated compared to other sectors. If we look at the trend, we do see that there is slight decline if you look at the principal and subsidiary status together in the proportion of women in rural areas in public employment. And this decline is largely led by this period where there was a slowdown in the number of work days created under NREGA. But if you look at the principal status, you see that public employment has become an even bigger contributor to employing women in rural areas. This is seen in terms of the absolute estimated numbers of workers as well. Of course, they're all very big numbers and too many, but basically what we see here again is if you take the principal and subsidiary status together, about 4 crore workers work for the government public sector in 2011-12, and this went down to around 3 crores in 2017-18, and this again largely has to do with the NREGA work being created less. This is of course anything we do in India, it's really difficult to give. These all India figures hide much more than they tell often, because there are huge state-wise variations. Even when you look at labor force participation figures, there are huge state-wise variations. When we look at the proportion of women amongst government workers, also you see that there is some variation. So here we've just looked at those states which are less than about 29% and more. So basically less than average and more. So about 30% of the workers in the government sector are female. So what I showed you earlier is that of all the employment created outside agriculture, how much is in public employment? Here we are looking at within public employment, what is the share of women? So of all the government jobs, let's say 30% are women, and this proportion varies largely across states. Bihar and Haryana are states which rank lowest when you look at the share of female employment in the government sector. What are these jobs that I'm talking about? Just to give an idea, and that again varies within public employment also by the nature of employment in terms of which sector we are talking about. So if you look at something like railways is the biggest employer in the world. Only 5.7% of the employees in railways are women, although the number of applications that come to railways of women has been increasing. So for a recent period, 2 years back, where we managed to find data of certain categories of posts that were opened up in the railways, we found that 17% of the applicants were women. But of those who are employed, less than 6% are women. Another sector where you see that, again, women are not so high is the police force, where only 8.7% of the total police force is of female employment, whereas there is a huge vacancy in the police force. It's not as if it's filled and they have too many people and they don't need more. There is a vacancy rate of 22% overall. And also when you look at within which basically is to say that there is space if they wanted to employ women. And there are all these talks when you talk about women's safety and Nirbhaya Fund and so on. There is a certain push within the policy space to have more women in the police force. But even within the police force, of these very few women who are there, you see that they're concentrated at the lower level. So about 72% of them are constables, and an additional almost 18% are at head constable position. So you have very few police officers who are women. Even the few women who are there in the police force are basically at the constable level. On the other hand, certain other sectors like education and health, of course, have many more, a larger proportion of women working in them. So on an all India basis, combining public, private, everything together, you see this is public alone. You see that women constitute about 48.3% of the total elementary education teaching workforce. So almost half of your primary school teachers are women. But once again, if you look at as you go higher level of education, like in higher education, you see that majority are at assistant professor level, and only 8% of the vice chancellors in the country are women. But then you have this whole cadre of what are called scheme workers, voluntary, honorary workers, which are all women exclusively. So ashas, Anganwadi workers, Anganwadi helpers, midday meal cooks and helpers, all of these together constitute over 6 million workers. Actually, all of them together constitute more than what the total railway employment is. And this is an all woman cadre. So basically, with these examples, also what I'm trying to show is that from the previous data, we see that the government is an important employer of women. Many women get employment opportunities within government, but within government also there is this occupational segregation that one can clearly see, that there are certain sectors where women are concentrated, like education, health. Also within each sector, women are more at the lower levels of both skill and hierarchy when it comes to where they are placed within the government. But of course, there is this advantage of government employment, that a large proportion of government employment is in regular salaried, the wage employee category, which basically means that they get a regular fixed wage. So there again, you see that if we look at 2017-18, in rural areas, of all the women employed in government, 76% of them are in regular employment. But again, a larger proportion of men are in regular employment compared to women in both rural and urban areas. In rural areas, the gap is much more. And these again match with what we saw in our field work in the types of areas where women are being employed more and more, which is in terms of these various sakhis. You have a Nyaya Sakhi, you have Pashu Sakhi, various these kind of semi-formal incentive-based work that women are employed in, but by the government. So for women in government, a large number of them are in regular employment, but a larger number of men are in regular employment compared to women. Casual, of course, is basically Narega, as well as other kinds of casual work, like say any kind of construction or road building and so on. So when you look at the classification of sectors and occupations, basically, again, looking at this NSS data, we find that 84% of all these female government workers in the principal status, they are basically engaged in these few sectors: education, health, public administration, which is your bureaucratic, lower level bureaucracy administration jobs, social security, and civil engineering basically means construction. And when you break it up, you see that 92% of the civil engineering is basically casual labor in public work, which is basically again Narega, where we know that a high proportion of the Narega workers are women. So education is the big sector within government that employs women. Health is also big, and administration, and so on. So a little bit of, you're not clear in NSS where the ashas, for instance, some of them might be classified under social work as well. If you look at the occupational categories, like I was saying, in the occupational hierarchy also, you find that most women, more than half of them, are in the categories which are known as technicians, associate professionals, or elementary occupations. So they're not at the managerial or skilled categories so much. But health and education, I do want to emphasize that not just from the employment point of view, because this is an area where there is so much more potential for job creation as well, and a requirement, not just to create jobs for women, but because it is absolutely on an area from, like I said in the beginning as well, where you need many, many more people on the ground if we are to achieve, say, the SDGs or any of the goals that India has set for itself also in the national health policy or education policy and so on. And the role of education and health sectors in women's employment has also gone up significantly. So if you look at the percentage of employment in health and education, it has been going up consistently over the years from 93 to 2017-18, with now 7.6% of female workers or employers being in education, and an additional 2.5% being in health. Once again, you see that for men, these sectors are not their major employers the way it is for women. And although the overall share is low, it has increased by over 4 times for education and over 5 times for health. And much of this increase, once again, is to do with expansion in government programs. While we do see that in real terms and in terms of percentage of GDP and so on, the spending on education and health has not increased as much as it would be desired. This is also a period when you have many government programs which has increased the cadre on the ground, like the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, the National Rural Health Mission, the universalization of the ICDS. All of these have created a huge cadre of frontline workers on the ground, mostly women, and unfortunately, mostly also underpaid, something I'll come to in a minute. So overall, when you compare public sector employment with uh, other sectors, they have better conditions of work. But if you look at public sector alone, if you look at women employed in public sector, we do see that they're mostly in regular employment. But like I said, regular only means that they're getting a regular salary. It could be any amount. But otherwise, the employment conditions are not too great. If you look at again this table is for only female government work, for female only government workers, not overall. So even women working for and principal status, even women working for the government, you see that 47% don't even have a written job contract. Again, not too surprising when you think of who are these women. So we met the ASHA workers, for instance, are just told they are an ASHA. They are not given a contract. There is no security of tenure or anything. The para teachers in school and so on. Anganwadi workers also, which is getting a little regularized now. Only half of them have a paid leave provision, and more than half of them don't have any social security benefit. It's better in urban areas, but urban areas there are fewer women working also. But you see that even within government employment, based on NSS data also, that the job conditions are not really something that are great, that they don't have the basic social security and provisions which you would require to consider it formal employment. Also, like I was saying, there is this problem that most women who are in public employment are both underpaid as well as overworked. And the cadre that we are talking about here is the Anganwadi, the ASHA worker, the para teachers in schools, the midday meal cooks and helpers. And this is not a small group. Like I said, just by numbers, there are over 60 lakh women. And they play extremely important roles. So we looked at each of these cadres and looked at what they do, and they're critical for basic health, education, and nutrition services to be reached to people. And if you look at the job descriptions of each of these people, like if you look at the job description of an Anganwadi worker, it runs into pages. There is no way any single human being can actually do everything that an Anganwadi worker is expected to do. For example, she has to do preschool education for 3 to 6 year old children. Preschool education means you are in one building, in one place with those children, you're playing with them, singing with them, and so on. At the same time, she's supposed to be distributing food to children, pregnant women, lactating women. She's supposed to be doing growth monitoring, nutrition and health education, home visits, preventing child marriage, preventing and addressing domestic violence, forming women's self-help groups, updating electoral rolls, doing disability surveys. It just goes on. The list goes on and on and on and on. And to do all that, if you look at ASHA workers, again, there is a long list. But these women are not even considered employees. They are considered honorary workers who are paid an honorarium. They are not paid a salary. So they would be counted as regular workers in your NSS data, but they are not paid a salary. Their unions have got to the Supreme Court and have lost, where the government has said that these people are not employees. They are actually volunteers who are taking care of their community, and we are giving them, it's almost like we are giving them a gift for the work that they are doing, but it's basically their responsibility. And this is a whole cadre which also shows us, again, this whole thing of the paid unpaid work continuum and how devalued women's work is, because it is done for free at home, where even the state thinks that you can use this work for free outside the home as well, because the work itself is devalued. So they are in the context of COVID, again, there have been a number of studies, including ours, where we've seen that their workload has increased even more, but their payment has not really increased. And for example, in Bihar, an Anganwadi worker gets paid 6,000 rupees a month, which is again lower than what the minimum wage would be if you worked every day. An ASHA worker does not even get paid a monthly salary, but only gets paid based on each task she does. So if she takes a woman to a primary health center for delivery, she gets 600 rupees. If she gets a child immunized, all the vaccines, then she gets 150 rupees. So on an average, and this again, government says that the rates are such that on an average, an ASHA worker makes 2,000 rupees a month. Whereas when we interviewed ASHA workers, we found that most of them work at least 6 hours a day is what they reported. So they're not considered employees. They're paid sometimes less than even minimum wages. Midday meal cooks and helpers, for example. The norm is that for every 25 children, you have one cook, and the cook is paid 1,000 rupees a month as honorarium. Again, the assumption is that because it's just a cooking of one meal, and women anyway cook in their houses, it's not a big deal, they just have to come to the school and cook, that 1,000 rupees is enough. But if you look at the time use of midday meal workers, they have to prepare, I mean, you're cooking for many more people, you have to prepare the ingredients, you have to cook, you have to serve, you have to clean the utensils. Actually, the job of the feeding the midday meal is as long as the school goes. They come in when the school opens and they go when the school gets over, so 9 to 3, but they are paid 1,000 rupees a month. Also, there is very poor infrastructure for the services they provide. Numerous interviews of, again, Anganwadi workers, for example, where they don't even have buildings. They're working out of the front room in their own house. They're many times paying out of their own pocket to keep the services continuing. So there is, it's not fun, the work that they do. Very few career prospects. I mean, an Anganwadi worker doesn't have very much to look forward to. It's not like, okay, it's an internship, I put in this work, after 10 years, I will get a regular job. In most cases, the Anganwadi workers remain Anganwadi workers, or Ashas remain Ashas for their entire span. There's a very few job openings that they get for them to be promoted to higher levels. At the same time, also large number of vacancies, particularly at the mid-level. So for example, in ICDS, you have something called a supervisory cadre. That is, for every 20 Anganwadi centers, you're supposed to have an ICDS supervisor, and the supervisor is very important. It's again an all-woman cadre, because that makes the job of the Anganwadi worker much easier. They provide on-the-job training, they do monitoring, they help them collect data and various things. And when there are vacancies at that level, the job of the Anganwadi worker increases. The job of the supervisors who are in place increases. So they're supposed to be one for 20 centers, you'll have one for 40 centers. So the most recent data, there's 30% vacancy at the national level in the ICDS supervisory cadre. Once again, there are state-wise differences in this. So if the situation is so bad, why do women still prefer public employment? So that I'm just going through some of the reasons that came out from our study through some quotes that people gave us. And this study was done in Telangana and Bihar. Unfortunately, we couldn't do our fieldwork because just as we were supposed to begin, the first national lockdown happened. So we did phone interviews. So there is that limitation, but still they were very intense interviews through which we learned a lot about what is it that women look for when they're looking for employment. And so these quotations are largely from women who are already in public employment at various levels. So the government teachers, Anganwadi workers, say a BDO, working in the district office as a peon, and so on. So first, surprisingly, after my whole rant about how they're not paid enough, the preference for government employment still is better pay. And this is not a reflection. That's why I first talked about how the pays in government is quite low. So this is not a reflection of government paying very high salaries, but it's a reflection of how few opportunities are available in the private sector for women. So for example, a Vidya volunteer who's a para teacher in Telangana gets 12,000 rupees a month, compared to an average about 4,000 rupees a month if she worked as a teacher in a private school in the same area. So see, both are very low. but the government job is still better because it has a better pay. In Telangana, Anganwadi workers also now get something like 10,000 rupees a month. Asha workers get 6,000 rupees a month. So even that much is not available in the private sector. In rural areas particularly, given the constraints that women cannot travel very far, and they're looking for work which they can access physically in terms of the transportation facilities and so on, the job opportunities which pay better than the government are really, really meager. The second is the job security. For example, you had, and particularly because we did these interviews at the time of COVID, they were also talking about it in relation to the COVID situation. For instance, a woman, the first quote is from, the first two are from Bihar. Like she says, because of COVID-19, I'm thinking, so this was a woman who was working as an ASHA worker, highly qualified, had done an undergraduate, but was not fine, was really not wanting to continue in that. But she says that because of COVID-19, I'm thinking of continuing in this job itself. There is no other job option also, right? In today's times, once someone is fired, it's very difficult to even find any job. Many other companies aren't even taking people. Many of my known friends were doing private jobs, they lost their jobs, they're facing a lot of issues. Travel is a huge problem. Time and travel in Bihar is too bad. But when there are schools, there will be schools locally and we can get some kind of a decent job. Even in Telangana, more than my thinking capacity, if you've seen the society, everybody says that government job is the best job, as it is a secure job. Private jobs are here today and tomorrow they might not be there. Social acceptance and respect, we found, was a huge factor when it came to working in the government. And this is the case actually even for Narega work, even for casual labor. It's more accepted for you to work in a Narega work site than to work in another, say, person's field. But particularly if it was these jobs, you know, which was seen as jobs, as employment, you had, like, say, Shashikala, who said that when she went, this again in Telangana, that she went to a nearby school to meet the headmaster for some relative's work. They made her sit down. They called her Madam Garu. Garu is like saying G. And she said that this respect was given to her only now because she cleared the village revenue officer exam and she was appointed as a VRO. Anusha, again, another very young woman, talked about how women usually in these meetings, they sit on the floor. Like there's a Jamkana, women sit on the floor, men are given chairs to sit. But if the woman is a government employee, if she's a teacher, if she's an A&M, if she's a BDO or anything, she is also given a chair to sit on. It also, there were a number of examples of how it made you a better candidate in the marriage market. Like if we have a government job, then the dowry rate will be less because then we both will have a job. So then I can ask, why should I give dowry? So her bargaining power increases. It doesn't matter much with education. So just having education doesn't mean much. In fact, with education, more dowry becomes higher because boy has to be more educated. But if we have a government job, then it will be less, or they might not even ask for dowry too, as respect will also be more. Not just in the case of dowry, and I'm just picking out examples of quotes. Many women said similar things. Also, that they respect and the support they get for their household chores increases. For example, this was somebody talking about somebody else, that when she was a private school teacher, the family used to pass tantrums if she rushed the cooking or didn't wash clothes on a particular day. However, once she became a government school teacher, she was treated respectfully, encouraged to go on time. Her mother-in-law happily did all the housework as she was going to do something important. So again, it's a regular job, it's seen as work, and so many more examples. Since we don't have the time, I didn't put it. Also in terms of travel, even during COVID, when it is a government job, we found that husbands, brothers, fathers-in-law were willing to drive the women to their work. Even during the lockdown, when there was no bus, there was no auto, they would bring their bike out, they would borrow a motorcycle, but they would take her to work because it was important work, it's government work, you cannot miss it, and it is income that comes regularly. So village assistants, panchayat secretaries, school teachers, all of them talked about how once they got this government job, there was somebody in the family who was willing to drop them, pick them up. Those kind of support also that you get. Fixed timings and predictable work was another reason that they all talked about, because they could then manage their household work. Once again, in all of this, you can see that it's still very, very gendered. I mean, the reason for the preference is a lot to do with the fact also that you can continue to do your household chores, you can continue to do your reproductive roles along with this job. So we didn't see that it changed that very much, but it did bring in a certain sense of self-worth, a certain sense of respect, and a feeling that we can ask for some space even within the household, that if I'm busy, if I have to do overtime, that it is possible, that it would not be as possible if it was not a government job. So this was in the survey that we did, where we spoke to a larger number of women. It was an open-ended question. These are all women, again, working for the government at various levels, from the village to the block, about the advantages of being in a government job. And these were the kind of things that they mentioned again: good salary, safety at workplace, family accepts this kind of work, status. A lot of the younger women also talked about seva, it gives us an opportunity to do something for the community. So generally, there was this sense that you're doing something valuable and you're doing something that the community accepts as something that is something that you can do, and you're paid for it and it's regular. At the same time, there was a lot of frustration as well, especially amongst the cadres like the scheme workers, because the payments, like I said, are low, because the work is difficult, because the infrastructure is poor. But still, there was very clearly the sense of this: given the lack of opportunities, this is the best we can get. And there were a number of examples of women who had done even postgraduates, MAs and MScs, who waited for a long time to try and get a better job, which was commensurate to their qualifications. But after a few years, with the lack of opportunities, gave up and joined as ashas or Anganwadi workers. So it was not always the first preference either. So what I'm again trying to say is that there are a number of features of public employment which makes it attractive for women. At the same time, this is a context where the number of jobs being created in the economy are very, very low. So it's not like there are other non-agricultural options available either. So does the government have any policies to encourage women's employment? Do they automatically go? Many governments do have, although they work at varying levels. For example, there are reservations in government jobs in a number of states that I've listed there: AP, Karnataka, Maharashtra, Odisha, Rajasthan, Bihar, Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh, Tamil Nadu. Most of these states have now a 33% or a 30% reservation in government jobs for women. But here again, what we saw is the way it works is, firstly, most of the states, the reservations are such that they begin from the time this order came. So it's not to ensure that of all employees, 33% are women, but of the new jobs that are announced after the reservation came in, 33% of those will be women. But the catch there is that after these policies, which are mostly recent, mostly in the last 10, 15 years in these states, there have been very few regular job opportunities coming up in the public sector. Along with this reservation of jobs for women, you also see that the trend in the public sector is towards outsourcing and contractualization, in which there is no reservation, not just for women, even for the earlier reserved categories of Dalit and Adivasi and so on. So in fact, on the one side, where you see a certain democratization in public employment at the ground level, with more women coming in these frontline worker roles, you also see that overall, where you look at it, it's actually becoming more and more elitist, because the new jobs that are coming in, which are regular, which pay properly, are not regular jobs. So even though there is this reservation, women are not really able to get much of a benefit of those, because the jobs themselves are very, very few. Nationally, the Ministry of Home Affairs also says that there's a 33% quota for women in national and state police forces. Constables, if you remember earlier, I showed you that there are women in constable positions now, but there are huge vacancies there still, and the proportion is still very small. It's nowhere close to 33%. So government basically uses women now as voluntary workers for a number of schemes and programs, directly, like all the examples I've given you. The National Rural Livelihood Missions in most states, like the Jivika mission in Bihar, where again the cadre at the frontline level are largely women, the women who are organizing other women into self-help groups, women field organizers, the women, those who are helping them maintain the accounts for the SHGs and so on are largely women. But even in these missions, in this Jivika, NRLM and so on, as you go higher up, when you look at the office staff, when you look at the trainers, when you look at the officers, they are mostly men still. But as the nature of the job becomes more and more informal, you see that there are more and more women employed there. And this whole thing of SHG women doing work for government is a whole different story, which I won't go into now. But that's another whole area where, again, that same thing of women being seen as there for free and not doing anything. Just one example, while we were doing this study, there was this scheme called Harita Haram in Telangana, where it was like a Swachh Bharat at a different kind of level. It was not focused on toilets, but it was at cleanliness of community spaces and so on. And we had women telling us, SHG members, about how they were almost forced to volunteer for Harita Haram. They had to sweep the roads, and there would be these men coming and supervising them, but no men had to volunteer time. So the voluntary is a whole different area, but you have above voluntary this whole level of the incentive, honorarium kind of workers who are given some money but not the status of an employee. There are, of course, reservations in panchayats and local bodies. They are not employees, but at least in local self-governance, there is a space for women now. There is the Maternity Benefits Act that has been recently amended, which the government would show off as one of the things they did to increase women's employment. But once again, it's a very limited act, now part of the Social Security Code, but it addresses only the 5% women in the formal sector. So given this kind of a context where on the one side, what I started with, there is a need, there is a potential for employment, and on the other side, women also prefer government jobs. So there is no argument here that they don't want to work and they won't come. Neither is there an argument that family will not allow them to work. And the number of positions available is quite large. Based on the 7th Pay Commission report, there are about 7.5 lakh positions in central government alone. Massive human development deficits, like we know. If we look at the public employees per thousand population, India is amongst the lowest. It's 111 in Brazil, 57 in China, 16 in India. So the potential need for service providers is very, very high. So it's not just, once again, a case of where I'm making a case for having government employing more women only because I think that's the only job that women can do, or that is the only thing that is available, but also that from so many other angles, there is a need to have more and more employment, filling vacancies, investing in infrastructure, building in the areas of just health and education. The State of Working India report in 2019 estimated can create more than 2 million jobs. And a large proportion of these jobs would go to women. They can create opportunities, which has an impact on human development outcomes, as well as addressing the demand deficit in the rural economy. So I'll just end here. Like the topic says, that this is one area in this current context of the debate on declining and low female labor force participation, one of the areas that we need to look at because of its also implications for the overall development of the economy is women's employment in the public sector. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. We'll now have the there's so much on time at 7:45. We'll now have the question and answer round. Anybody who has a question, please either put it in chat box or unmute yourself. Raise a hand and unmute yourself.
I can go with the first question. Maybe. So, ma'am, thank you so much for the wonderful talk. I really enjoyed it. But I'm just curious about your reflections on. So your talk was mostly about, say, regular salaried public sector. So if there is a public investment, and I'm specifically talking about NREGA, the participation of women in a public investment vis-a-vis in several other investments would probably also have a different pattern. So I know that earlier in Kerala, the women's participation in NREGA was higher than in several other states in terms of that. So do you have any new reflections from the field or from your work that on not just on regular salaried employment, but on public investments, the participation levels of women are different from the other investments happening in the market? Thank you. I have a second question, but maybe I will put it and you can. So I also want to have your reflection on, it was very interesting to know that you did phone surveys, and there are these debates happening, or there are these discussions across India, given the COVID times, about, I mean, clearly the quality would be an issue, but do you see that it as an option in future? And what was your experience in field on phone surveys when there's a COVID, where people were ready to talk about other issues regarding their social and economic status? Over to you. Thank you.
The first question, a quick answer, like I briefly mentioned, it is true, like NREGA, even now about 55% nationally of the work created in NREGA is female employment. And that's what I said that, and this is earlier work, Ruchira, if you remember, even in Palanpur, that even if it's the same agricultural work or the road building work, when it is NREGA work, more women are willing to do, or families are more willing to allow women to do it, because it is government work. Sarkari kaam, it is seen as something that is respectable. So there is that definitely there. But the problem is that the government then uses it also not the right way. I mean, then you are doing all these things, no? You're getting SHGs to, like when we were doing the initial, some bit of field work we had managed to do on the field. Again, these SHG programs where you insist on them attending meetings which make no sense to them. It becomes like bheed hai, or they are doing some rally on child marriage out of the blue. It's not really come out of their this thing. So there is that side to it as well. But of course, there have been some very good government-led programs like say the Kudumbashree in Kerala, where with adequate wages and proper dignity of work, women have managed to get work through government programs. On the issue of the phone surveys, I am not at all for phone surveys. This was done because we had to do it, because we had already we were at a stage where we had done the scoping, we had actually gone to the field, identified the villages, found the people, and then the lockdown happened. And so we had to complete the study. It is definitely not the same. Although the interviews were very rich. And I'll tell you, we did two kinds of phone surveys. We did qualitative interviews with about 70 women, which we did ourselves, the three of us. And we did a questionnaire-based survey. And the questionnaire-based survey was really odd, the data that we got from it. And I don't know how it was through a professional, like survey organizations and investigators. We could not meet the people who were doing the survey. We just did an online training. They were not from the area where the survey was being done. All of this really matters. And in the qualitative, we, I think, managed to have slightly better results, but it was 10 times the effort, and the satisfaction was definitely not there. Because when you do an interview, it's not just about what you're talking with the woman. It's also the environment, what is happening all around, who's coming in, who's going in. So if I'm speaking to a project officer of Indira Kanti Patam in Telangana, I'm not able to imagine her workspace. Where is she sitting? So when I'm asking her a question like, do you have access to a toilet? It's difficult for her to answer. It's difficult for me to understand what is going on. It would have been so different if we were there. There was also the issue of, at the more frontline, women not even having access to phones for such a long time. Each of our interviews took 40 minutes to an hour sometimes. And so we had to call repeatedly, and they would tell us, baad mein karo, subah karo, sham ko karo. To get each woman, there was many calls. In Bihar particularly, we often heard a male voice in the background saying, ye bolo, wo bolo. Right? Especially when we were asking things like, do you have problems with your superiors? Are you paid on time? Is your wages cut for any reason? Those are the questions I didn't present very much also, because I'm also not very sure. You could make out that in certain cases they were being prompted on what to say. Especially when you're interviewing women, I think this phone thing doesn't work. Even in person, we had great difficulty interviewing women years back, again in the Palanpur study, where getting that woman alone was such a challenge. And so on the phone, you can imagine, we don't even know what's going on there. They have not seen us. They don't know. We could speak Hindi and Telugu, but our dialects were clearly very urban and different. So those barriers you cross in person through your body language and through other kinds of things, which we could not do on the phone.
Next we have Satvik. Please unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. I have one question and concern. First is, did you get any sense that what kind of women that are getting job in the newer kind of positions? Are they first generation public sector worker, or they were always somebody else working at the public sector, and then, you know, something else is pulling the string? And I have two more concerns. The first is with the the newer jobs. Most of them that you are saying are public sector jobs. Most are very contractual, and it will not be wrong to say informal. So by claiming their public job, are we really kind of diluting, not diluting, but kind of sometimes misrepresenting the nature of job that people are receiving? Maybe when you are explaining, it's becoming apparent that these are not really equal jobs. That was I kind of clubbed two of my concern into one. Yeah.
Okay, the first one is again an interesting question, and you see a lot of variation here. In fact, what you see is where it's the regular jobs, like the school teachers were one of the best jobs that we found of the variety of women that we interviewed. If they were not the Vidya volunteers and Shiksha Mitras, but the regular school teachers, because the regular school teachers, it was well paid and they were fixed timings and all that. Most cases, there was an example of somebody else in the family, male or female, who was doing a similar kind of a job. It was not necessarily in the immediate family, but like an uncle or a cousin. They would say phalana the, unhone bataya kaise apply karna hai. You know, all these are also huge things on how do you apply, where do these advertisements come out, and of course again in the phone we couldn't get out what strings do you pull to even get it, because each time there's a position there are like 100 people fighting for the same thing. But at the lower levels it was much, they were particularly in Telangana, mostly they were first generation literates, not even first generation government employees. So these young women were the first generation in their families who had completed class 10 and studied higher. And so there was a lot of, we actually have a paper on just that also, on their, and for them the higher education was very much for employment. You know, the school education was education for education's sake, and there were stories about how parents made so many sacrifices to make it happen for them to be able to study, and then not getting the job, and there the parents' imagination also is a government job. So getting a VRO or a panchayat secretary, which is not a great paid job, it really transforms the entire family. And there we had a lot of women who were actually first generation literates. We had a lot of women who were more educated than their husbands, who completed their education post marriage also, who were given that opportunity, and again who clearly said that for a government job we got this support, we would not have got it for anything else. But and there was a difference between Telangana and Bihar as well, where in Telangana there was still an imagination of what a private job would be, particularly in the blocks which were closer to the city. They did say that if we get a computer operator job or even like a salesperson job, these are things we would be happy to do. But we are not getting it because you have to travel all the way to Hyderabad. It's not there in the rural area and so on. In Bihar, they didn't even know what it is they could get. This is all that was available. It was so much about the availability of jobs, which links up to your second question also, which is absolutely right. Throughout, I try to emphasize what I'm saying. Public employment, it is employment provided by the government. That's it. It is not like तुम्हें 7th पे commission मिल रहा है या 5th पे commission and you're getting a salary and there's a basic pay and leave and all that. None of that is happening. At the same time, I still think that it's I mean, you have to push for both together. And this kind of employment also gives opportunity for organization and collective action. If you look at Anganwadi workers, for instance, over the last 5 or 6 years, the amount of space they've been able to bargain for themselves in many states is quite commendable, given where they began, which was 1,500 rupees a month. But in a number of states, and that is still not enough, but in a number of particularly southern states now, Anganwadi workers are getting paid 10,000, 12,000 a month. They're continuing to organize themselves and they're continuing to protest and continuing to demand better wages. So I think at least there is that opportunity. Of course, it should not have to happen like that. Everybody needs to fight. But that is where the other side of the story, that these jobs are not just, they're not charity. These are things we need if we want this country to develop. These are things we need if we want our children to be healthy, if we want our population to be educated. And that's something that one needs to understand. I'm only hoping that this is how it begins and you see the value and then it improves. But you're absolutely right. This is not decent work in the ILO definition by any means.
So just to understand, so there is a kind of social mobility there.
Absolutely. In terms of respect, what they think of themselves, there's a huge difference.
And you see, you show in some of, maybe on the slide 10 or somewhere, you showed that there was 1.4 or some employment percent, and then it becomes like 4 times increased to become something. But I don't want to be pessimistic, but I'm quite pessimistic here in the sense that, you see, it looks 4 times, but if it is 1.4, and in 20 years it becomes 4 times, it's 8, and then, you know, the achievement becomes really not so significant, right?
Sure. So again, what one is talking about is the potential, not talking about how great things have happened. But that even this little, in actually absolute numbers also, it's huge number of women, right, whose lives have been affected. And they've also been opened up to new challenges like never before, which should not have been like that. So if you look at an advanced country, a pre-primary teacher is one of the most respected kind of jobs. It's a skilled job. Here you look at an Anganwadi worker as an honorary worker. You know, teaching a 3-year-old is nowhere an unskilled job. And here we are not even calling it a job. We are just saying she takes care of children in the house, she can come and take care of children in the center. No, that's not how it works. These are all skilled jobs, but just having these programs allows us to at least talk about it than not having any preschool program at all. That is the only optimism I see, that at least there is a scope. But there's so much more need to be done, both in terms of the job conditions, and imagine what is the service the child is getting. If there's no training, there are no books, there's no building, there is no toys, and you have this extremely overworked woman for 40 of you, what is the preschool education that child is getting? And the inequity begins there then.
Thank you very much.
You're
Ruchira,
muted.
please go ahead.
Ruchira, can't hear you.
No.
Maybe Ruchira, you can type out your question because we can't hear you.
Okay, I'll just type it out.
Now,
Now we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, so my question is that of course, I know you have looked at it, but I would if you can elaborate a little bit on the caste dimension of these public employments, because in Palanpur we saw that it's from the upper caste households that women go for these teacher and these regular jobs. And if you have seen some kind of a pattern, systematic pattern in your study in this Bihar and Telangana comparative, if you can elaborate a little bit on that. My second, not a question, but if you have anything to talk about it, because Kerala, Arun was asking about the case of Kerala, but then in Kerala, we know that there is a very strong public action. The political will is also very strong. The institutions are extremely old and well established. I mean, compared to Bihar, where there is almost a very weak level of institutions. So what would be your reflections on that? And you were earlier talking about the SHG groups. I would like to add one of my observations from Telangana. We were studying the SERP Telangana's initiative here. And what we observed is that when there are two meetings of SERP Telangana, one is for the microfinance, where they come in and talk about the loans and the repayments. The second meeting is about more social issues, where there are certain modules on health and sanitation and nutrition. They talk about that. So the families will typically create a problem for these women to come and join the second meeting. The attendance is different from the first meeting. So this is something I wanted to add to your earlier observations that kind of resonates with what we observed. And in Bihar, in the Anganwadis, we also observed something called something called Anganwadi Pati as well. So when there is talk of financial matters in the Anganwadi, you want to see the rosters. So we went as government officers, not as researchers. We wanted as the common review mission. But when you typically want to see the rosters and the financial accounts and the diaries, the women will be kind of silent, and the husbands will come and pitch in, and they'll start giving the answers. So there is also that thing. But even with that, with SHG, I think, of course, I agree with the point you just said, but we also have found a systematic relation with women going into panchayat elections, standing for sarpanches after being part of SHG for a long time. So yeah, so that would be from me. Over to you.
Okay, the first question on caste, I kind of alluded to it. We didn't have, so one of the problems was also we were hoping to get departmental data as well from them. And what we found is for the contractual and the non-regular in terms of regular government job, not the NSS regular, they don't even maintain this data. So it was very clear also when you looked at it that unless when it is a regular job which has reservation, that's where you saw the backward castes and the SC and ST being represented. But what this contractualization is actually doing is what you say. There is so much more discretion on who gets the job that you're finding again that these are captured largely by the upper castes. Very few, but you do see women in the regular posts again, like in Telangana, that would be, say, a panchayat secretary post, which is not a very high post, but there it happens through the PSC. So where the appointments happen through the Public Service Commission, there is still reservation, then it happens. When it's left to the community, then it's often from the upper caste. So we saw, so that is another problem of contractualization and outsourcing. Outsourcing, they have no data. So outsourcing, they'll just tell you that, say, cleanliness service in the municipal hospital has been given to X. And it's they don't know how many they're employing, which caste, gender, nothing, they don't care.
Yeah, same with most of awardees programs now. They're doing it through contractors, and they have no beneficiary lists or anything.
The outsourcing and the thing, but you could see, like, even in those, there was that caste hierarchy. If it's a sweeper's job, it was from the lower caste and so on. And there was no way to correct it also because the government washes its hands off saying this is outsourced or contract. So all the norms do not apply. On the Bihar, Kerala institutions, obviously, I mean, the regional differences are quite stark. And again, I didn't talk about it very much. In this study, we looked at Telangana and Bihar. Earlier study, we looked on other things on UP and Tamil Nadu. And everywhere this comes out in many different ways, which is again not to say that there is no patriarchy in Kerala. There is a lot of patriarchy in Kerala, no doubt about it, and data also shows it. But still, there is a qualitative difference in many basic things in the way things are seen. And that then reflects in everything that is done. Even in this COVID response, you can see that the kind of respect, say, a frontline worker was given in Kerala in this COVID response, from what we know from news reports and so on. In Bihar, it was not that easy for ASHA workers to go home to home and tell people to check their temperatures. In the earlier phase, they were made to do that, and they had to listen to a lot of saying who the hell are you and who allowed you to do this and so on, which did not happen in Kerala. And that's to do with the history of, I think, public institutions and so on as well. On the SHG part, yeah, you're right. Again, in fact, in Jivika and Bihar, what many women we spoke to, that's why I said that every meeting should have both. No, don't separate this Bachat wala meeting from the Gyan wala meeting. If you do it together, then you speak half an hour this, we'll come for the meeting, you talk about the rest. Also.
Then they start going home. The moment
Yeah,
you
but
start
that also
talking
is done in such an instrumental fashion. Like we were in this
Yeah.
meeting where there were 100 women, SHG women meeting, and they had this stage kind of thing. All the women are sitting on the floor. They had tables, kursis. They were all men. They were bank officer, Jivika organizer. These people who had come to talk, and they kept calling out women ki aake gana swachhata pe gana gao, and then 3 women will come and sing on the mic.
Yeah.
And it was very clear that getting those 100 women was job of other women who went house to house, mobilized and brought them. But on the stage, you didn't have women. So all of this, I mean, the amount of this kind of thing you see in government programs, even this far in the 21st century, is quite amazing. There you see slight nuances, changes in Telangana and Bihar as well. It also comes with more number of people being educated in Telangana, just having more women in the public space. Like we had one case where this woman in the Mandal Development Office, MDO office, said that there was no toilet for a long time. But after a few years, 3 other women got employed in the office. When it was 4 of them, they went and petitioned and they got a women's toilet constructed in the MDO office. So she said, once more women came, I could talk about it. When I was alone, I used to go to somebody's house and I couldn't. So it's a process as well.
Okay, so I think I'll be the person asking the last question here. In your survey, did you find the kind of difference between the state schemes and the central schemes? Did women have a preference to work against something, or the payment was much more prompt in certain aspects, whereas it was not so much in the case of the other sponsored schemes? Did that issue come up?
Not really, because whether it was a state or a center scheme, they look at the state government as their as the
Parent
employer,
or
or the immediate person. So there was not real difference. Like say Anganwadi is technically a central scheme. Asha is a central. It's supposed to come from there, whereas regular PSC jobs are state. It's more they are looking for the service commission jobs. So you would see again that was a difference between Telangana and Bihar. Telangana, even if they joined as Anganwadi Asha, they're all the time doing some preparing for some exam, with some hope that some exam will happen and they'll get some job. In Bihar, it was really sad that they did not even know that there could be exams which will happen for which they can prepare for. There was that is also because of the environment, because there were so few women around them who were doing, getting any employment opportunities.
Thank you.
Varsha, I think we are about time. You wanna? Okay, so I will take the responsibility of thanking you. Thank you so much for this, really enlightening talk. It has really added a different dimension to the webinar series we have and to the understanding about women's work in India to all our young scholars. We really look for thank you, and we really look forward for future associations with you, our YSI South Asia. Thank you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
But so before we end, let me also remind all our participants that this is a part of the this webinar is a part of the webinar series on women's work in South Asia. The next week we have a talk from Sri Lanka. Dr. Ramani Guntalike will talk about lower number of female employment in Sri Lanka, discussing the factors behind why this is happening in Sri Lanka. So we look forward to all of you over there. Thank you and have a nice day.